Welcome back to another episode of Queer Prophets Podcast. I wish I had named this something else because that's really hard for my mouth to say some days. So I'm your host, Diane Conklin. Just as a reminder, there are always three pillars that we talk about here at Queer Prophets Podcast, and they are inclusion, community, and growth. And I have no doubt in my mind that the guest who's honoring me with his time today is that we're going to get into all three of those things in the conversation. So I'm honored to have Chris Lugo. And as usually, I'm going to let Chris introduce himself. I'm not going to tell you anything, even though I'm a little bit more apt to do that this time. But I'm going to let Chris introduce himself, and then we'll get started. So Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. It is really an honor to be here, and congratulations on the launch of Queer Prophets. So excited to see your journey. My name is Chris Lugo, everyone. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I serve as Executive Director of the Out Georgia Business Alliance. We're Georgia's only LGBTQ+ and allied Chamber of Commerce here in the state, and we're also an affiliate of the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce based out of Washington, D.C. So my role as Executive Director, I've been here for almost 2 years. The end of May will be 2 years in this role. And prior to that, I was actually in a completely different world. I was in the youth performing arts space up in Chicago. I served as Executive Director and a Marketing Development Director for an organization up there in the Chicagoland area. It was one that I spent 17 years straight from a student performer, then volunteer, and then they roped you in to do a little bit more and more and more over the years. And I was lucky to serve as their first ever Executive Director. And my background, beyond that, I grew up in North Central Florida, spent a lot of time in a small town called Florhome, Florida. If you haven't heard of it, not a surprise. There's one blinking red light, one gas station, and about 10 churches. I had a pony growing up named Mr. Flintstone. I was blessed to go to the University of Florida for my degree in business marketing and communications. And I spent part of my career at IBM Corporation up in Chicago. I was in Pittsburgh for a stretch, worked for an energy company out there called Direct Energy Business. Also spent some time with the Alzheimer's Association as I started to move into the nonprofit space, and then spent several years with the Cavaliers, the nonprofit up in Chicago. So pleasure to be here. I know that was a real quick snapshot of my background, but here we are. This is me.
Yeah, well, that's great. I didn't know any of that. I knew that you had come in as the Executive Director when it was still Atlanta Gay Chamber, and I didn't really know all of that about your background. So that's really cool. So Chris, let's talk. I want to talk from a business perspective for just a minute. What do you see as sort of the issues and challenges that for queer business owners here as we get started and go into 2021 and beyond? What do you think the biggest challenges and the biggest things that business owners are struggling with right now?
Well, I think, what I see is still, navigating COVID-19 and understanding how not only it's kind of the superficial pivot of an organization, but what does that mean through and through? How do you update your systems as an organization? How do you make sure that you're recruiting and retaining the best talent? And it's not enough just to say that you're an LGBTQ owned or queer owned business. What are you doing to walk the walk and as you talk about inclusion? So are you looking at hiring diverse and bringing in diverse candidates into your organization to provide the best set of access to innovative ideas and new business ideas for an organization? I think the nuts and bolts, just as any entrepreneur would be tackling right now, is top of mind, especially when it comes to managing one's finances right now, understanding where to go for support, if it's the federal program with PPP loans, all the way to the many corporations and foundations that are providing grants to small businesses. There's so much going on. So I think some of the challenges now kind of boil down to where can you go for reliable information? And honestly, I think one thing that we don't do enough of as queer individuals or queer business leaders and owners is look for mentors and others who can be there along the way where you can ask those questions. And I know you support a number of clients in that particular consulting and guidance space, but I don't think we reach out enough. I think when we're growing up, especially as a young queer person, you don't see many queer leaders in your neighborhood, in your organization, at your school. and you kind of learn to compartmentalize and not look outside kind of the few feet right in front of you for mentorship and guidance. And I think we can do a whole lot more of that, especially as we're tackling 2021. And hopefully we're on the other side of COVID for the most part as we get towards the end of the year.
Right. You know, I had never really thought about that, but you're right. I think probably as queer business owners, we probably have a tendency to reach out less, just from that perspective of, especially, and maybe this is different for the younger crowd, but I think especially for, people maybe 30 or 40 and up, it's that piece of, coming up when there weren't a lot of gay leaders, right? I mean, we can turn the TV on today and see all sorts of, Ellen and the list goes on and on, Melissa Etheridge, and, we've got the L Word, right. And we've got all these different shows and places where we can see people who are, quote, like us, right? But it's that piece of asking for help and that vulnerability that happens when we do ask for help of, is it safe to ask for help? And then, and where do we go? I think one of the reasons that I started Queer Profits is that I saw this gap of where does a queer business owner really go for help? I mean, we have gay chambers and we have some of those kinds of things, but they're not always focused 100% on how do I help the business owner with marketing and sales and systems and strategy and planning and implementation. And so that's really why I did, what I did from this perspective. But I love that idea of, asking for help. Do you have tips on how you think that it might be easier for us to do that?
One, I think you hit on it where, that notion of being vulnerable it's really tough for anyone, no matter what. It is tough to put your guard down and say, I may not have all the answers, or I need help. I know that's something I struggle with all the time of being able, I can recognize that I need help in a moment, or I can recognize that I might not be the expert in this particular area, but I'm leading a project on this, or I'm forced to really look at how our organization is responding to this particular topic or area of focus. I am constantly kind of trying to check myself and understand how can I put that guard down, be a bit more vulnerable and say, I need some help. And it's interesting. I think every time I've done that, I've been overwhelmingly surprised by the positive response of folks just wanting to chip in. I think, when it comes to queer business owners, if they are connected to an LGBTQ chamber of commerce or some other professional networking organizations, perhaps, I think those are wonderful starting points to start building relationships. One thing that I love about the Outdoor Business Alliance is, yes, we provide resources and support to our member businesses, most of predominantly LGBTQ owned and led, but we also know that we develop these really wonderful friendships and relationships among each other. And as we start to kind of do more networking, virtual or otherwise, I think even just developing those one-on-one relationships where Diane knows about me, Chris, and if I put out the APB and say, I need help in this area, Diane may not be the right person to provide direct support, but Diane may know somebody in her network who could. So I think that is a huge step that I know for me personally, I'm tackling every single day. How do I get better at just acknowledging when I'm not, killing it 100% all the time? And that's never the case. And if I can be a little bit more vulnerable and ask for help, especially, in the queer space, I think that is part of hopefully what can allow us to be even more successful.
Yeah. Well, and I think the community piece is something that sometimes we have a tendency, at least I know I do, right? I cocoon. I'm in my own little bubble with my, usually with just me sometimes, but, with 2 or 3 people or whatever it is. And that's as far as we go, when in fact, I have this mass network. I mean, I have a lot of people that I know who know me over the years and all of that. And yet we have a tendency, I think, to sort of narrow focus in on that community is like this instead of like this. And, one of the things I want to do again with this is that community piece. Talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about that.
Well, and even just let's look at it through the lens of we're all experiencing COVID right now. We're a year into this thing, and we've all bunkered down, and we have limited our social interactions, our physical interactions with folks over this past year. My goodness, that has really taken a toll on a lot of us, and even just kind of getting to the point now where, we're seeing more from a vaccine perspective, out there. We are hopeful that will be, late summer into the fall, perhaps, that we have some live gatherings again. We are so longing for that. And that's what's so beautiful about, the Outdoor Business Alliance and our community is we really rally together and rally around each other when the time is right and when we have those opportunities. But I think the community piece is so important, Diane, and really thinking about how do we not only look at how can somebody help me, but I think we always have to think about flipping that around. How can I help you? And it may not be direct support. Like I mentioned earlier, it could be, hey, I don't have the answer or I can't help you, but you know what? I think I may know someone who I could introduce you to. That type of warm introduction goes such a long way, and I think builds confidence amongst each other to say, hey, we don't have to be perfect. We can ask for help, and our community can step up and not only provide that support, but maybe it's even go out and patronize that business, right? I think we don't do enough of sharing about our own wins in life, and if we have our own business, we don't do enough of that promotion. And I would love to see our community really embrace how do we share not only the hip, sexy, whatever stuff on social media, but let's share about each other's businesses, because ultimately that's going to help us create more wealth within our community and have an impact on the employees, on their families, on our communities at large.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. So I want to back up for a minute. So one of the things that you said early on, and that almost everyone that I've talked to in the last several weeks that we've talked about, is this idea about diversity and inclusion. And, I think sometimes we think as queer business owners, well, we have that covered, right? I mean, geez, we're gay, we're lesbian, we're bi, we're trans, we're whatever. And yet, are we inclusive in our communities? Are we inclusive inside of what we're doing? Let's just put it out there. What do you think?
I think oftentimes it is easy for us to hide under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. And like you said, say, well, that means we are diverse, we are inclusive, and we're good to go. We don't have to look at those policies. We don't have to look at how we're training our folks or how we're hiring, or take a look at some of the trends internally with your staff, or even maybe feel that pressure to look around the competitive landscape and say, okay, it's not enough just to be a queer business owner. I've got to actually I believe you have to do more work to really take a look internally at all of your policies, your procedures, your culture internally. It's not enough just to self-identify as a gay business owner or lesbian business owner. I think you've got to take additional steps forward, and don't fall into the trap of just, yes, acknowledging your queerness, but don't hide underneath that to prevent taking some serious steps forward to address those inequities that we absolutely have within our community. My goodness, if it comes to racism, ableism, on down the line, there's so much that is prevalent within the LGBTQ plus community. And if queer business owners are serious about their investment and their passion for diversity and inclusion work, I think they've got to challenge themselves to learn. They've got to make sure that they're not just, like you were mentioning earlier, staying in their own bubble and not challenging themselves to improve how they serve their people, or their communities that they're in.
Yeah, I love this conversation. So let's talk about how we go about starting to do this, right? So I'll just use an example, and you know as well as I do, right? Let's just go into a networking meeting, not necessarily one at Out Georgia. Let's just say any networking meeting, right? And let's just say it is a queer networking meeting. You know what happens? You walk in, right? All the lesbians over here, all the gay men are over here, all the trans people are over here, all the Black people are over here. It's this segmented, niched, like very cliquey, I guess, for to use a high school word, right? Kind of situation. So I really would love to, like, and I've asked this question a lot, but how do we start to integrate and have more inclusion in our community instead of having that sort of separateness when we do things like that?
Well, that's a huge question, and it is pervasive within our community. And I think it's perhaps sometimes it's not intentional either, right? You come in, you may see somebody you're friends with outside of that networking event, and you immediately beeline it to them, strike up that conversation, and then you get focused on that. And maybe you don't kind of take a look around the room and take some like visual inventory of what's going on in the space. And, am I as an individual, am I going out of my way to, yes, acknowledge the folks that I'm already connected with and friends with and maybe know really well, but am I challenging myself? If it's a networking event, hopefully you're looking to meet new folks and really relishing in different perspectives that are represented within your industry or otherwise. But I do think that kind of points to maybe a larger question around, if it's those organizations or what we're seeing from our community leaders or organizational leaders, are they helping set the tone of what those expectations should be of, having an inclusive and welcoming event or networking opportunity? So I would love to make sure that if, an organization is going to pull something together like that, are their board members, one, representative of the community, but two, are the board members out there kind of keeping their eyes peeled and helping bring people together? And maybe even, at a certain point, midway through, maybe they call an audible and say, hey, we're going to switch it up. We want to break up some of those cliques. And maybe you can do it in a, kind of a fun and, non-threatening way. But I think you're right. Humans have this natural tendency to gravitate towards ones that, may look like you or share something in common. How do you kind of buck that before you get to that event and say, I'm intentionally going to make sure that I'm meeting folks outside of my normal circle? And it's really hard to do, but I think we owe it to ourselves and the community to make that commitment. And especially if that means, hey, I noticed that we have a number of trans business owners or bi business owners or non-binary business owners in the room. Oh my gosh, I want to learn about them. And then I want to help connect them with somebody else who can be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because we are really just a cosm of the bigger picture, right? And we do it in it's a natural thing. We hang out with people who are like us, right? Whether they look like us, whether they do the same things as us, whatever that piece is. And I think it's a little more noticeable, not prevalent probably, but noticeable in our community, because when you go to these things, you can, you sort of clearly see. But I think to your point, right, it takes that conscious effort, sort of like what you were talking about with the diversity and inclusion piece, right? Really looking critically at and saying, okay, do I always talk to the same people? When you go to a business meeting, are you always sitting at the table where there's all lesbians or all gay men or all trans people or all Black? Or, I often laugh, Jack, but Jack and I found ourselves at a table together at one of the meetings not too long ago. And I leaned over and said, check it out. It's that the segmented thing. And he leaned back and he said, yeah, Diane, that's because all the gay men in the room haven't figured out their best friends are lesbians or can be lesbians. So we always chuckle about it. But it is something that is, for me, is sort of that forefront, right? And I think it has to be, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a conscious effort. And so much of what we do in our lives is unconscious, right? We drive the same way to the same place, right, every day to get the same lunch, to meet the same people, to have the same conversations.
Yeah, and you know what? And maybe, if it's an organization that is leading, a networking event like that, and say it's for queer or LGBTQ business owners and leaders, and maybe it's as simple as not only having some of the leadership demonstrate the those that kind of networking atmosphere that you'd like to see, but also what if it says, some simple steps of sending a prompt in advance. We're going to have this 2-hour networking event at whatever location, and we want you to think about how are you going to meet somebody outside of your circle? How are you going to meet somebody in a different industry? How are you going to go out of your way to learn about, say, the trans business owners that we're highlighting at this particular event? Maybe there's even some simple things, like you said, we are creatures of habit. And I know I am reading Atomic Habits by James Clear right now, and trying to build some, small habits on my end. But my goodness, we are creatures of habit. And if we can, like you said, kind of introduce some tweaks to how we may do business, how we may show up in a boardroom or meeting room. If you notice a segment of people perhaps that are all share those commonalities sitting together, maybe you go and plop down right in the middle and break it up and say, hey, I noticed y'all all know each other. I want to get to know you, and I want to break it up a little bit. Maybe we can do that in a not quite a non-threatening way, but one that makes us think about our actions in advance.
Yeah, and I love the fact of being proactive, right, and doing something ahead of time to say, hey, think about this before you come. I quite frankly, I never thought about that, but I love that idea. So sort of in the same vein, and I'm going to ask you, this is going to be a little personal, but you said nothing was off limits. So you are married to a man of a different race. And so I just love to hear your experience with that, not in the world at large, but inside of our community. Are we still just like everyone else? Obviously there is racism and all these things in our community, but what kind of reaction do you get and have you gotten, because you guys have been together for a while? I always love to have that conversation.
My husband, Tommy, and I have been together since 2004. So we've been together for almost 17 years. And this summer, we will have been married for 7 years. We were married in Pennsylvania the year before the Supreme Court acted in 2015. I'm a Mexican American. I'm certainly white passing. And I acknowledge and recognize that privilege that comes along with that. My husband is a Black gay man, and I think we had some challenges over the years. One, kind of getting to know his experience, and not just kind of glossing over what his feelings or what his interpretations and what his experience is in a space, for instance. I think, we spent a couple of 3-year stints, two separate 3-year stints in Chicago, and we lived on the north side, and it's, the Boys Town neighborhood, and there's Andersonville, another neighborhood. So there's a lot of gay happening in that part of town. But it's also still, we found at times still very segregated in the experiences. You may go into a bar in what at the time was called Boys Town, and Tommy could be the only Black person in the room. And, my immediate reaction was, maybe, it's not impacting me. I'm not maybe even paying attention to that, but I have had to learn how to kind of look for his cues of how he is feeling in a particular space, and then training myself to then start thinking in advance to say, okay, let me scan the room. Let me see, is Tommy going to be the only person of color in this room? Do I really want to be here in this space if Tommy is not going to feel comfortable being himself in that space? So I think being, in an interracial couple, it highlights a lot of those challenges that, being a Black man in America, Tommy goes through. And I have had, every day, I'm learning how I can better understand and support him. And it's hard. it's hard work, and it's not, I think one thing we get caught up with diversity and inclusion work is you did your D&I training, you did your unconscious bias training, check, and I am no longer biased. Right. I am inclusive. Right. And it doesn't work that way. Right. It is not a one and done. And same thing for being in a relationship, in an interracial relationship or any relationship. You are constantly learning about your partner or your partners, how you can support them, and also recognizing that you may need to give space in some instances, or you may need to get close and embrace and fully support in others. So my goodness, it's a lot of learning, a lot of love involved, and a lot of, getting corrected and having those kind of difficult moments of learning that are painful in that moment, but are also important to a healthier relationship overall.
Yeah. So this just popped into my head, so I'm just going to ask it. So do you find, have you had the opposite thing happen, especially now that you're here in Atlanta? Have you ever found yourself where you've gone someplace and you're the only white person in the room?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I really enjoy those opportunities because, one, it kind of turns what some of those experiences we've had together, turns those around, right? Where Tommy may have been the only person of color in the room. If that is my experience, and if I have any feelings of uncomfortableness or uneasiness, or not fitting in, my goodness, that's been part of his story all of his life, and every Black person's story all of their life, for the most part. Tommy and I went to a performing arts event on the south side of Chicago. This must have been 2017 or 2018, and it was this spring performance event on the south side, like I mentioned. And there was a room. There were probably 200 or 300 family members, parents, family, friends of an all-Black performing ensemble, and the entire room were predominantly Black and people of color. And I was the only non-Black person in the room. And it was really eye-opening because I was experiencing what, again, was a common experience for Tommy. And I just also thought it was incredibly inspiring as well. The way that we saw those parents interact with their kids and support their kids, it was incredibly inspiring and beautiful. And I loved that they had a space that they could gather as a community. One, the kids could perform, but really show off the great work that nonprofit was up to. And here in Atlanta, I've certainly experienced the same thing. And, I really embrace those moments because I think, one, even if we look at the LGBTQ community, we often demand allyship of us and our community, but we hesitate sometimes to extend that allyship to other disadvantaged or marginalized or underrepresented communities. And, if it may be, uncomfortable or uneasy for you to be in a space where you don't look like anyone in the room, that's okay. Embrace that. It might feel a little awkward. It might feel a little strange, but I think you lean into that, you embrace it, and you understand how you navigate that and perhaps how you can support that particular community.
Yeah. I love the piece of, when you said, we want, you didn't say these are my words, but right. We want the acceptance. We want people to be okay with us. And yet we don't always extend that. And I find that very interesting, right? We want to be accepted. We want to be, love is love. We can use all those fun little acronyms and all of that. And yet, it can be forget about the, different color skin or different, religion or whatever. Let's just talk about, a different political belief or different political party, right? We go crazy. And it's like, wait, why aren't they entitled to their own opinion? Just somebody said this the other day, and I thought it was very interesting, that you don't always have to have somebody agree with you in order for them to have some level of acceptance and love. We can agree to disagree, right? You don't have to agree with who I love or how I live or any of that. And we can still get along and have this semblance of, what I think of as America, right? I mean, this melting pot of things. And I think we've been so galvanized for so long but with our differences that sometimes we forget that at some level, we're all having this human experience. And if we would just be a little more open and loving, we might be a little more accepting of other people's ideas, opinions, lifestyles, religions, fill in the blank.
Absolutely agreed. I think a lot about how can we more generously embrace empathy, that conscious effort to try to understand the other person's experience. I think we often, if it's politics or even, let's say, all the anti-trans legislation been introduced in the country, and Georgia's no exception, although we're hopefully in a good spot there with halting some of those bills. But I often find that we talk about, or the trans community is talked about as if they're not human, or we talk about different communities or political affiliations or whatever. We talk about them as if they are not human. And that's the one thing that kind of gets to me the most. If we can just act like we're two human beings right here having a conversation, we give a shit about each other and we want to see each other do well. And you doing better doesn't mean I'm not going to do better. It's not a zero-sum game. I think we could learn a lot from each other if we put down our guard. We actually took a moment to maybe ask some questions or do our own research and educate ourselves about what may be challenging that other individual person or community, and really think about how am I being generous with empathy and understanding. I don't think we see enough of that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally agree. Right. I listened to somebody talk yesterday. It's a former client who's just done amazing things. And he was talking about this idea of serving, right? Even as the leader, even as the business owner, if you go in every day and think of this as you're serving your employees, right? And they're serving as well as you, but they're serving, your client base. And it just got me thinking, if we would open our minds a little bit more to walking into every situation, thinking in our heads, how can I serve this situation? How can I give? How can I give more wherever I am than I take today? I think that's a whole different perspective.
Absolutely. And, when we do take a posture of being generous with our empathy, generous with our time and understanding, my goodness, I think we are better off as an individual. And I think, in the business context, it also helps us better connect with and understand our employees, the human capital. And that is even, I hate that phrase, but the human beings who are behind delivering your brand's experience and connecting with customers. I also like to think about, our role as the Out Georgia Business Alliance. Yes, we're serving our businesses in the now, but I think about this wake of inspiration that could impact somebody who's behind us. And that doesn't necessarily mean age. It could be somebody who is further on in life who may be coming into their own gender identity and expression, or it could be a young person who's grappling with their sexuality. We don't know how this interaction right here today or the interaction we have with an employee of ours is going to have that kind of butterfly or ripple effect. And who knows who's going to be inspired down the line to go after a gig because they saw that you had a pro-trans stance, and you were articulate and visible about supporting the trans community, or that you were a queer business owner who is in a space that you wouldn't think of, out queer people being in, if it's finance or, any other space like that. I think we don't put enough value in kind of like that wake of inspiration. My goodness, there are a lot of folks that are looking to us that are going to tune into this podcast, either in the moment it's released or down the line. And this could have an inspiration on whatever their journey may be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a friend several years ago who took me through this process. She called it the circle of life. And we talked about what are the 5 or 6 things that are important. And so, I started off with something like business, which turned into, something completely different. But one of mine in my circle, and I have it, it's actually right here. My business one turned into giving voice to your message. But the philanthropic give back turned into saving lives. And in some ways, I was uncomfortable with that. And when we started talking about just some of the things that I was doing and the foundation I was working on at the time, and even this, right? I mean, how do you know that there's not some young, queer person out there listening who's having a hard time? There's so many organizations who do this on purpose. And yet I think sometimes we lose that connection of people are watching, whether you think they are or not. You're having an impact, whether you want to or not. And it's that piece of, what if there's somebody out there, whether it's a youngster or somebody in business or somebody who just whatever, and listen to this and something you said or something I said, made an impact enough that they gave themselves one more day, or they picked up the phone to call the Trevor Project, or, reached out to somebody at Out Georgia or whatever, because they were struggling and they were having a hard time. And that conversation we had about vulnerability, they were like, yeah, I can be vulnerable for 5 seconds. And so I think a lot about, that piece of the impact that we have. And, I think, again, we get on autopilot and sometimes forget about that part. But all it takes is, a text message from somebody, or a thank you, or, that recognition of, hey, you made a difference today. And it's like, wow, the impact. And I talk about the ripple effect, right? And for me, the acronym I use is repetition in place produces little effect somewhere. Your one ripple can affect hundreds, thousands, millions of lives because of the people that then go on to do the things that they're going to do to, because of that one thing you said, or that one thing that you did, or that one look you gave somebody, or the wink of an eye. I mean, it can be something so little. So.
And I think you're right when it comes to, it doesn't have to be this profound, highly articulate statement or speech, or, this glossy, high definition, video, or any of that. It could be as simple as, writing an email or picking up the phone and saying, hey, I just want to say you showed up today and you rocked.
Yeah.
You were great.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I wanted to say. You're beautiful. I love you. And I care about you.
Yep.
And, it could be very simple. Yeah. And even in the business context, I don't think we do enough of like just giving those acknowledgments and affirmations of
good job.
Like of success. And, or even when maybe there's something that was a bit challenging, of just affirming those people and their effort and their intention. And maybe it didn't quite work out this time, but that's okay. We're all learning together. I think we don't invest enough time in kind of reaching out to our fellow, neighbor, friend, on a regular basis, just say, hey, I'm here. I support you. We may not talk every day, but know that I care about you. And
we're also busy being busy.
Yeah, absolutely.
We forget the people side of it. And I think that's so important. So important.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Chris, what's the best business advice that you either have ever gotten or that you want to sort of impart?
Wow. I think for me, I touched on it a little earlier. I think having the courage, the chutzpah to say, I don't know everything, and I'm okay with that. But you know what? I want to reach out to folks and educate myself, or bring that perspective and expertise into the equation. I think as a leader in my last organization at the Cavaliers, and here, one thing that really kind of sticks with me is not only asking for help and being okay as the executive director saying, I don't know, I'm not sure what the answer is on this one. I need some support. But also, I'm a real firm believer in shining a bright bright ass spotlight on the other people who are there doing the work. And it is not about me taking the credit. It is about me shining the spotlight on the people who are hustling, who are investing the hours, the blood, sweat, and tears to pull off these projects, or whatever the case may be. If I shine a spotlight and acknowledge the people who are doing the work, I know it's only gonna be better for me as a leader of the organization, and the organization is going to be able to do more work, serve our people, all that stuff. But I think we, leaders should really go out of their way to acknowledge and not just be a cheerleader for cheerleaders' sake, but to be that intentional coach and to shine a bright spotlight on the human beings who are bringing your brand and your organization to life, and be comfortable not always being in the spotlight as a leader. In fact, I would love if you kind of took your role as, the lighting technician, and you were thinking about, how am I going to move this light around the room? Or if I do, how do I ensure that those people have the skills and the support to do their best work? They may not be there just now, but I think as a leader, if we're acknowledging the others who are investing so much in the organization's success, but also recognizing where individuals may be struggling, or where they may not have those skills just yet. How can you be that coach that listens, that understands, and that gets their input on how to advance their career, and how you can be the most supportive manager or coach or leader for them on their journey?
Yeah, I love that. And, I think the piece about asking for help, right? It's that part of, I think one of the things that happens when you do that is people see that you acknowledge that there are things you don't know, right? It's that piece of that most people don't know that they don't know. And I think when you acknowledge the fact that, hey, there's something I need help with and I don't know, there's this piece of people going, wow, he's human too. Wow, check that out. She doesn't think she knows everything. Which is a horrible cross to bear when you're a Leo and only talk about things that you know, but that's a whole nother story.
Exactly. Leo here as well.
I am. See, I knew there's something else I loved about you.
Yeah.
So final question before I let you have you give your contact information. What do you think are the biggest, we sort of talked about this from a business perspective, but I'm going to open the question up a little bit more. What are the biggest issues that you think are facing our community right now?
Wow, that's a huge loaded question. I love it. I think inequities, if it's economic inequity, access to healthcare, housing inequities, visibility inequities. I think, again, we kind of, as a umbrella LGBTQ plus organization, we get caught up in kind of general representation, and we're not critical about looking at those who are most vulnerable and marginalized and underrepresented within our community. I think we talk about equality a whole lot, but we don't talk about equity a lot, making sure that, a solution here may be appropriate for somebody, but the solution may need to be different for another person so that they have equitable access to resources. I don't think we do enough in our community, to be honest, around financial literacy and education. We see too many queer people who are in debt, who are unable to, own their own homes and build wealth as a family. We see, not enough queer entrepreneurs, for that matter. I think there are so many wonderful could be and should be entrepreneurs that we need to invest more energy in. But I think to me, a lot of this boils down to like economic equity. Because I think if we have a focus on ensuring that the most marginalized and disadvantaged or underrepresented have perhaps even more resources to get to where they need to be, then I think we're going to see that flow into equitable healthcare access, equitable housing, which is still a big issue for members of our community. And then I think that would then trickle into some longer term financial stability, investments, homes, What are we doing for our elders in the LGBTQ plus community? I think that's one for me. It's hard to believe that we don't focus even more on our elders right now as a community, with what we all know of experiencing the AIDS crisis and all the elders and leaders that we lost during that period of time in particular. But even before that, there were so many pioneers and legends who made this world what it is today for our community. And we don't do enough to recognize and honor those individuals, but also our current elders right now, and especially those who may be without an immediate family, or who maybe they don't have kids. What are we doing as a community to step up and ensure that they've got care, that we are being compassionate towards them? I think about that a lot. And then, from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, how do we tackle some of those things? I'm a firm believer that we're not supposed to be the solution to everything. We're supposed to be, a specific solution, and then have a community of supporting resources and organizations that provide that 360 view. But yeah, I think these basic and systematic inequities within our organization, or within our community, especially from an economic perspective. I got the Out Georgia hat on. And honestly, I think we don't focus enough on our elders.
Yeah, and I think, while you can have a sole purpose as an entity, whether it's something like Out Georgia or a business, you can also be the catalyst for other things. And I think as business owners, especially, there's this need to be more of a catalyst for change. Not necessarily that you're doing it, but that you have that point. You had something you want to say?
Yeah, and I think now more than any time in our history, it seems like we're in a period of time where businesses are encouraged to lead with their values, not only internally, but externally in their community. Yeah. If there is something that's happening from a legislative perspective that's going to have a negative impact on your employees or the community you identify with, or your families of the ones you employ, or your customers, I think it's more appropriate than ever to be able to speak out about your values and connect the lines of, well, you may not think this restaurant needs to speak out about healthcare issues or legislative issues. Guess what? It has an impact on their people. Yeah. Not only the bottom line, perhaps, but the humans that are representing that organization. And I also believe, as you mentioned, oftentimes smaller business owners, and especially our queer business owners, they may not feel like they're a big enough size to make a difference. If it's a donation or employee giving or a volunteer effort. But I guarantee you, even if you're a solo entrepreneur, it's just you, by articulating your values, or even saying, hey, to your clients, we really care about these causes, and maybe a portion of our proceeds this year are going to go to these nonprofits that are doing the good work in our community. I think it's, now more than ever, we can leverage our voice, and we can leverage our business voice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the history piece is an interesting thing too. One of my marketing mentors always says, if you don't know the history of what you're doing in your business, and same in our community, right? If you don't know who those people are, if you don't know what happened during the AIDS crisis, or even before that, right? Stonewall, all of those things, go check it out, because it will give you a very different perspective, I think, on no matter how old you are, right? It's that piece of what came before me, and knowing that. So, Chris, this has been amazing. I am just so grateful for your time and energy. And I knew this was going to be a great conversation. I had no idea where it was going to go, but we talked about some things that I haven't talked about with anybody else. So this has been great. So give people your contact information. How do they get in touch with you? How do they get to know more about, Out Georgia, whatever you want to give?
Absolutely. So you can learn about the Out Georgia Business Alliance at outgeorgia.org. That's outgeorgia.org. And you can email me. It is simply Chris, CHRIS, .lugo, LUGO, at outgeorgia.org. My information is on the website as well if you head that direction. But I would really encourage you, if you're an LGBTQ plus business owner, a strong ally. We can't do what we do without allies, of course. But if you're interested in the Out Georgia Business Alliance, becoming a member and participating with our community, reach out. I would love to have a conversation. Again, everyone is welcome at the Out Georgia Business Alliance, no matter how you identify, if you're an ally, or if you're a corporation that's wanting to do some good work in the world. We welcome everyone, as long as you have a commitment to inclusion and belonging, and the LGBTQ plus community. You belong at the Out Georgia Business Alliance, and that's outgeorgia.org. So yeah, I would love to meet anyone who's interested in speaking about that. And you can also find me on LinkedIn as well. Just search for Chris Lugo. I'll pop up. I'll be in one of those results.
Great. And I would just also say, if you're not in the Georgia area, because a lot of you are, but a lot of you are across the world and country and all of that, check out in your local area. Go Google gay chambers in your area. Go Google gay community centers. If you can't find one, check out the NGLCC. And certainly my guess is if you can't find something and you need a resource, reach out to Chris, and he can probably point you in the right direction no matter where you live. So again, right. Chris, I just want to thank you. This has been just so amazing. Just as a reminder, I'm your host, Diane Conklin. This has been the Queer Profits Podcast. And you can find us on Facebook at Queer Profits, at Queer Profits Podcast. If you want some more support as a business owner, go to Queer Profits, the group. We're always talking about business. I'm always posting different things in there. And if you want the resource that I always offer for you, which is the 3 keys to growing your business fast and getting more clients and making more money, just go to queerprofits.com, and I'll be happy to send that report out to you however you want it, video, audio, or in the written format. So until next time, I'm Diane Conklin with Queer Profits Podcast. Again, 3 pillars, and we talked about all of them. I promised you that we would. I knew we would. Inclusion, community, and growth. Make it a great day.